So today we're going to be discussing how to create a culture of psychological safety, and to kind of run through what that is, why it's important, and kind of how to build that. I've got James Bedford. How you doing, James? You okay?
Hi. Yeah, not too bad. How are you doing today, Chris?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you, mate. I'm good.
Good.
So I've followed you on LinkedIn for quite a while, probably across two or three companies now, and like you're obviously quite active. You've got your newsletter and all that kind of stuff. So I'm assuming most people will know of or kind of know who you are. But for anyone that doesn't, do you want to just give a brief background about yourself and how you've sort of got to where you are?
Sure. Yeah, of course. Yeah, as I said, my name's James. So I'm based in Wiltshire, so in the UK. I have been in the software industry, I guess, for 10, 11 years now. So I was a career changer. I used to be a ventilation installer, forklift driver. I also had a company with my girlfriend and my wife, breeding Shetland ponies. So
Wow,
I've done a few different things and decided to kind of
I
make the
bet
move
that's a
into.
background that you've never seen anyone else come
No,
through. Like,
no. There's been a few kind of horsey people that I've seen in companies, and it's
horsey
always
people.
yeah, it's quite a nice way of connecting with people. But yeah, never seen anyone that's had quite that background before.
Right.
Um,
And then kind of how did you get into the software engineering kind of side of
yeah,
things?
so I came in initially as a kind of a web designer. So it had always been something that I've kind of played with as a kid going into young teen, building websites. So I wasn't necessarily starting from scratch. Um, so I kind of went into web design. The front end coding kind of came from there. And my first job in the industry was as a kind of a design engineer. So I would basically build and then code out websites for a small agency that were fairly local to me. Um, yeah, it just kind of grew from there. Started focusing a bit more on the kind of engineering side of things over the following couple of years, and then moved to a consultancy called Mango. There I was very focused on kind of like React stack, front end engineering, and that was where I started managing people. I took on my first kind of like leadership responsibility there. I had a small team of three engineers, and yeah, fell in love with kind of engineering leadership.
Love that. First of all, I'd love to know if you, when you went into that design agency, if you specifically specialized in people that were also horse breeders and did websites for them, or if it was kind of a cross industry.
No, it
No.
was no, not that at all. It was just very kind of small local businesses. Yeah, ranging from kind of like electricians to local
Forklift
salons.
drivers, like, and just any of your previous jobs specifically. But
No,
um,
never any of the previous jobs.
fair.
I did always toy with kind of becoming a specialist in building websites for like one certain thing, but I never did it.
Yeah, fair. And then kind of now you're at Zerion, right?
Yeah. So joined Zerion about 5 months ago. Um, kind of
How's that
my
going?
Yeah, really good. Um, it kind of came off a bit of a career break. So I had 6 months off at the start of the year to work on a couple of personal projects and just kind of, I guess, rethink about what I wanted to be doing. Going back to kind of a smaller startup was something that I think was right for me at the time. So yeah, Zerion really fit that. It's got about 40 people, and the engineering team's about 18 people. Yeah, really nice company to work for.
Nice. I mean, considering the market this year, probably quite a nice time to have like chosen to take 6 months off. Like,
Yes.
it's completely separate to what we're talking about. How did you find kind of looking for a new role? Because it's quite brutal out there for a lot of engineering leaders at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. I think it was a challenge. I think one of the more challenging things, so where I'm located, I'm about 2.5, 3 hours outside of London, kind of navigating the remote working slash hybrid working policies was something that I found quite challenging. So a lot of companies wanted kind of like 3 days a week in the office in London, and yeah, it was just something that I think it kind of changes my quality of life, I guess, quite drastically. So it wasn't something that I was open to doing. I've been working kind of 1 to 2 days a week in London for the last couple of years or so, and yeah, moving away from that was something that I really wanted and really tried to do, and I found that quite hard, seeing as hybrid working is becoming more of a popular thing. So yeah, it was definitely challenging. I think all in all, I spent about 2 months trying to find the next role in total, and yeah, did a few interviews, but yeah, was lucky to come across Zerion.
Amazing. I'm glad you landed on your feet. And you also run your own kind of consulting and coaching company as well, right?
Yes, yeah. So I do a number of kind of mentorship for different engineers, people in kind of various points of their career. The year previous, I started working as a consultant. So I did kind of like a short contracting role for another startup called Zoa. Um, and yeah, like the flexibility that brings. And I think as I go on and progress in my career, like having more of the flexibility to kind of work with individuals and work with other smaller companies has been really nice. So yeah, it's been definitely a focus to kind of grow my own thing alongside the roles that I'm doing kind of on an everyday basis as well.
Nice. I think you can have quite a lot of impact on people like outside of your normal working job, right? Whether
Yes.
it's a couple of people a month or like one organization, like a quarter that you're kind of like helping, you can do a lot in your free time.
Yes.
Not necessarily too much of your free time. You can add quite a lot of value, right? So, I'll obviously put all of your links and everything like that for people to find you and more about your consulting and stuff like that, along with the pod. But let's talk about psychological safety, which is kind of what
Yes.
we've had, and we kind of went back and forth about this on LinkedIn, which kind of prompted it. So, from like kind of your definition, like what is psychological safety?
Yeah, I think it's a big topic, and I think there's multiple things. I guess to summarize, when you feel psychologically safe in a team, you feel safe to be yourself. You feel safe to bring yourself to work, to be true to yourself. Not afraid to take risks, not afraid of repercussions for bringing yourself to work and trying your best. I think that's the way that I would summarize it. I think we can all think back to kind of school, like typical scenario of raising your hand to answer a question, getting it wrong, and then feeling very unsafe to try it again. I think that is the feeling that we're trying to avoid, definitely in kind of a high performing engineering or company. We want people to be able to contribute to take risks, to suggest ideas, and that is all underpinned by psychological safety. And I think as a leader, it's a really important thing to focus on having a culture that is safe and that people feel safe to be in.
Sure. And why do you think it's so important for engineering teams to create this environment?
So I think there's multiple reasons. I think I can dive down deeper into each one. Um, I think for first, like a first example, I think a psychologically unsafe team is generally quite a toxic working environment. So, like thinking back to a time when I felt particularly unsafe in a role that I was doing, I was one of the only people that was working remote in a team. Hearing kind of comments about, oh, remote workers are not necessarily as productive as people that are in the office, it kind of eats away, and you feel like you have extra to prove, or that almost you can't do the role that you've been given, or you can't work from home, even though that was something that was assigned to you.
Was that from like higher ups, or was that from peers, or like a little bit of a mixture?
A little bit of both, and it was an example quite a long time ago. I think I've definitely gotten better at questioning and finding a culture that I think is valuing psychological safety. But yeah, quite early in my career, that was something that I felt quite an outlier about. I'd always been wanting to work remotely, and yeah, I think being an outlier there, it does make you feel quite unsafe, especially when your peers are discussing it, as well.
Yeah. My mum weirdly had this. She's worked in the pharmaceutical industry for years. She's retired now, but like she retired shortly after COVID, and she had been remote up until COVID happened. Then everyone obviously got forced remote for a year or two,
Yeah.
and then they brought everyone like back in, and like
Yep.
they were like to my mum, you're coming back in as well. She was like, well, I've been remote for like
Yeah.
10, 15 years, but companies were just like, well, obviously, like if everyone's coming back in, like, well, you need to come back in as well. And she's like, well, I've been doing this job like well for like, I
Yeah.
think she's been at the company like 10 plus years, but all of a sudden they were like, well, no, like you've got to come in, and because that was the norm. And I think she did end up going in because she felt forced to. Like, do you know
That's
what I
it.
mean?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's how I felt. If I could summarize it at the time, it's almost you feel forced to come in. You feel guilty for doing something that kind of was given to you. Like it's yeah. I think that's a particularly unsafe environment to be in, and I think that's one example. There are a lot of other examples. But yeah, that kind of I think feeling like an outlier in the team, feeling as though your needs are not addressed or that you're being treated differently, I think is a good example of like a psychologically unsafe team.
How
Um,
do you kind of like, obviously this is one of your things where you're like, I need to work in this environment, so I'm sure
yes,
you're kind of, when you're interviewing, when you're speaking to people, you can kind of tell like whether it's the right sort of environment for you. Like, this must be quite hard during an interview process where you're putting on like your best shiniest version of you, and the company is doing the same thing. Like, it must be quite hard to be like, can I be myself here without being
yeah,
like, I demand like these things, and like, do you know what I mean? It must be quite hard to actually figure out if the company's right. And I'm sure like this isn't going to be foolproof, like, and there will be companies that are like, oh yeah, you can do that, and then like, actually now that you've joined,
yeah,
like,
yeah,
you can't. But like, what kind of things were you asking to see if it was the right kind of environment when you were
yeah,
looking?
yeah. I think a good way of telling whether a company kind of values that psychological safety in an interviewing setting, and I think it's a really important thing to do as a leader, is to ask them questions. Do they show vulnerability? Are they open about things that they're finding challenging, that are not going so well? I think actually that's also a really good sign of psychological safety in that transparency is really, really important for any leader and for any team. Um, so a couple of questions that I usually like to ask is what is the biggest challenge? What is not going well at the minute? Um, and you kind of get, I think if people sugarcoat the answer, or if you feel like, okay, they're shying away from being quite open about what they are struggling with, I think it's not always, but I think it can be a telltale sign that maybe that's not necessarily something that those people value. So I give an example of Zerion speaking to the CTO, the CEO, head of product, etc. Um, they responded really openly and candidly to those questions, and that was so important to me to be like, okay, I'm going to be a valued member of this team. I'm going to be hired. Like, am I going to get those open conversations or the trust from the people that I'm going to be working for to be honest and open with me about what they're struggling with and what their problems are and what the company is finding hard. And they were so open and transparent, and I think that was really good sign. Okay, this is a good culture. This is a psychologically safe culture. If the C-suite are feeling comfortable to speak to someone that they're interviewing about these things, then like, what is it like actually being part of the company? And yeah, I definitely haven't been let down in that regard. I think to go back to your original question about like remote working specifically, I think especially navigating kind of this hybrid way of working is really tricky. I've been quite open with people that I speak to that like I know for a fact that I don't work particularly well in an office environment just because of the way that I work. I think if that's listened to and adhered to, then that's also a good sign of psychological safety and like understanding people's needs and inclusivity. And I think it all feeds into it. So yeah, I think my advice for any leader or for anyone really, and when you're going through an interviewing process and you're checking for like psychological safety and checking for these signs, just ask questions, ask lots and lots of questions, and if you feel that you're getting good answers to those things, then yeah, I think that's a really good sign.
Yeah, I feel like hybrid working is actually harder than like remote or on site,
Yep.
isn't it? Because everyone's kind of like somewhere in between, particularly when you got different people going in on different days and stuff like that. Even the pain of having like to set up a meeting where you got three people in the office, six people remote, and like trying to trying to get that set up versus everyone being
Yes.
remote is a nightmare. I think feel like people are still going to be working on the perfect hybrid setups for quite a while. But that's really interesting to say. Would you say from like an as an interviewer, like if you were hiring for your team, would you, because of your experience and because that's so important to you, do you think you would open up more yourself to people if they ask you those kind of questions to show that you do have this
Yes.
psychologically safe environment for them to come and join?
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Absolutely. I think it works both ways. I I think to me it's so important interviewing people. I think it's natural to feel like you're a salesperson for the company. You want to show the company off in the best light. Um, But I think like bending the truth about those sorts of things, painting the company in the best light that you can. I think one thing it loses an element of trust when that individual joins, and then they're like, "Ah, oh, this isn't quite as I imagined, or this isn't what I have been told." So yeah, I'm very open about things that maybe we're finding hard, things that the company doesn't do well, and of course things that the company does do well. But yeah, I think that's the same kind of trust that I would give to my reports and people that I manage, speaking openly about things that are going well, things that are not going well. Yeah, I think that's so important. Like, not we're all adults. Like, we can handle a truth or like a not so ideal situation. Like, we don't need to kind of gloss over hard things to like save people's feelings or
Yeah.
to present a really good scenario when someone's interviewing to a company. I
Yeah.
think if someone wants to genuinely come and solve problems, then they will. And yeah, I think that's so important.
Yeah, and it's one of those things. If you said to like someone asked you like what why are you hiring for this role? Like what problems are there? Like blah blah, blah, and you're like there's none really. Like we're everything's perfect. You'd be like, well, what
Yeah,
the fuck are you like hiring me for? Like
yeah, yeah.
you obviously don't need me if everything's perfect. So, yeah, I think that level of truth and kind of openness
Yes,
is essential there. I guess what other things can this psychologically safe environment kind of bring to your team? You mentioned one of the things you mentioned was like kind of like quite a high performing like culture.
yeah,
I feel like there's this almost like stigma that high performance is like micromanagement and like what are you
mm,
doing and what are you doing and everyone's in and like must work really hard at all times and the harder you work the higher people perform, whereas
yes,
is obviously not the case. How does this impact the performance side of things? Because there must be people that are like, well, like if I just let everyone do whatever they want, then people just aren't going to work as hard, and they'll just kind of take
Yeah.
the piss like a little bit. So a lot of it must come down to obviously trust and all that kind of
Oh yeah.
stuff. But
Yeah.
how is creating this environment, and how has it impacted the performance of the current company and previous companies?
Yeah. I think it's so important, and I think it's so important to have a psychological safe team for high performance for multiple different things. I think, as you said, that trust is really important. I think, to me, a high performing team is a diverse team. It's a team that has a multitude of different opinions, of different ideas, that people feel safe to bring their ideas to the table, and then we can genuinely make a decision. This is the best foot forward. And I think psychological safety underpins all of that. If no one feels safe to bring their ideas to the table, then you're only going to listen to one opinion all of the time. And regardless of seniority, the most senior person in the team is not always they don't always have the best opinion. So I think having that psychologically safe environment where everyone can bring their opinion to the table, people can give new perspectives. Maybe there's an engineering problem in particular. Collaboration, running ideas back and forward from each other and discussing it as a team is so important. I think this is, yeah, I think that the majority of the companies that I've worked for have done quite a good job in doing that. I think there are kind of a few outliers of quite micromanaging tech leads or EMs that I've been working with, who, having such a strong opinion, um, it doesn't lead to the best outcome. And it also demotivates the team. If the team are not feeling able to make change or share an opinion or have an impact on the work that is being done, it's very, very demotivating. So I think, for that reason, like, safety is so important for high performance. I think another reason for kind of the importance of safety in a high performing team is a high performing team requires continuous feedback. And sometimes that's good, but sometimes it's going to be hard feedback. It's going to be constructive feedback. And you need to feel safe to be able to give people feedback. I think I've been part of a few companies where people have done really well at giving positive feedback to other people, but have shied away from the constructive side of things. And that's just as important, to address things that are not going well, to let people know when their behaviors have not been as good as they should be, or to let people know how they can have more impact. I think this is something I really try and set with my teams and the reports that I'm working with is I will give you feedback because I want you to do the best in your role. And I trust that you are going to give feedback to me because I want you to think that I can do the best in my role. And to do the best in my role, I need feedback from you. And for someone to come to their manager and say, "Look, I don't like what you did there. You could have done this instead. Like, this would have been better." It takes a lot of trust. And I think it's something that any leader should put a lot of emphasis on, creating that environment when they join a company, when they take on a new team, when they have a new report. Always focus on building trust so people can feel safe to give you feedback, and they feel safe that you can give them feedback as well, and they can grow from it. I think that also is so important for high performing teams.
Sure, because there must be people that are leaving organizations because of their manager that's doing very small things that people just don't feel comfortable to tell them that they're pissing
Yeah,
them off. Like whether it's you said having a go at them for very small things, or like like maybe the reverse, not praising them and only
Hmm.
berating and like all of that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. And it might just be they have no idea, and because they don't have that relationship with their team, they would rather just leave than
Yeah.
like be like, oh, this is actually really annoying. This makes me feel like this. Like the whole team feels that way. You end up
Yes.
just having people probably leave and kind of enter into
Yes.
a bit of a revolving door. So a lot of that is around, like you said, sort of building that environment of trust. So let's go through. I guess there would be two scenarios, right? Like either you're growing an engineering team from like complete scratch,
Yeah.
or like you're coming into an environment as like a new engineering leader, and there's a team that, or you're already the engineering leader of like a current team. I guess either if you were doing it from scratch, or like you were doing this to like an existing team, and you're like, right, this is now going to become a priority to me. Like,
Yeah.
where would you start? Like, how do you create this environment?
I think my starting point would be with the individuals. I think having initial conversations with people, setting those intentions that, okay, this is a trusting environment. Um, I have very regular one-to-ones with each of the people that I manage. That is a safe space to discuss anything. No matter what is discussed here, it doesn't leave unless you want it to. I think setting the expectations for that and abiding by that and showing people that that is the case is so important. I think that really is the underpinning, I think, of everything and creating that safe environment. It's about building that trusting relationship between report and manager, um, so that people can come and, okay, do you know what? Like, my colleague demonstrated this behavior, and um, I'm not okay with it. I think that is one example. Another example is being able to speak openly about things that maybe are not going well at home, or maybe you have like a personal problem that is going to affect your performance. So I think that's something that often people kind of don't speak openly about because they don't feel safe to. I think this is one thing that I do. I speak about things that like I'm struggling with at home or finding this particularly hard at the minute, and showing that vulnerability as a manager in that kind of like one-to-one relationship, I think is really really key. I think sticking to the kind of vulnerability topic for a minute, when I was at Monzo, so I was an engineering manager at Monzo back in 2019. Um, Tom Blomfield, who was the CEO at the time, in 2020, going through the pandemic, he wrote an open note telling people about how he was like struggling with his mental health and finding like the company so difficult, and
Wow.
it was so vulnerable, but also a big company at the time. You felt very close, very personal to that individual, and I think it pulled everyone so much closer together as a team. And yes, like he came up with some next steps, but just to feel like, okay, this is an individual here, it's a person, and if he feels able to address like 1,500 people about how he's struggling, like I can speak about it. I think that's super example. So yeah, and I think going back to your question about like starting off with a new team, I would start with like the individuals, but then also kind of in a team setting. Um, I think there's two examples, and I think one is like experimentation, and I'd like to kind of come back to that in a minute, maybe. The other is kind of learning from mistakes and being open to give that feedback, as we were just speaking about. Um, I think speaking openly about things that have not gone well in a team is super important also to that trust. Um, that's why I love retrospectives. I'm a massive fan of retrospectives. Like I don't have strong opinions about ways of working really, other than the fact that I will always advocate for teams getting together like on a regular cadence and just discussing what has gone well and what hasn't gone well. I think as a ritual that is so important to I'm kind of encouraging people to speak about things that have not gone well and finding resolve. I think this was one thing that I noticed at Zerion. Actually, we put a lot of emphasis on the good, and a few people were okay at speaking about the bad, but it was something that we've definitely improved. And these conversations feel much more open, much more honest, much more candid, and that's important. I think a team should feel able to speak about, okay, I found this frustrating, or this took way much longer than it should have done. And it's all safety. And I think leading by example, by encouraging it, by praising when people speak about something that they might have been worried to speak about, whether they speak about something hard, like encouraging that behavior, I think is really, really key.
I think one of the toughest things that I've seen about talking about the negative side of things is that if you're not in a space where people feel comfortable, like often bringing up like what's gone
Mm-hmm.
wrong comes with blame, like, and either you're admitting yourself, like I fucked up, this was my fault, like blah blah blah, or you're having to bring to the table that it was someone else's, and
Yes.
I feel like putting that blame and or like addressing whose fault something going wrong with
Yeah.
is really hard, particularly when it's your own and having to
Yeah.
admit that kind of like openly in like a team.
Yeah.
But I feel like you saying as a manager, you being able to be like, oh, like I messed up here, like would make that a lot easier. Is that the majority of what this is just making it okay to be like, like my bad, this was
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Exactly. I think making mistakes okay. I think is key. I think as a leader, leading by example, by speaking about things that maybe you have not done so well is also very important. I think that perhaps more importantly is finding like blame in the process rather than the individuals. Like, what have we not done yet that allowed us to make that mistake? Maybe like it was, I don't know, an engineering mishap or an incident. Like maybe it was one person pushing some code to production, that set off like an incident. But I think the focus should be on not on that individual for doing that, but how do we make sure that that doesn't happen again? And I
Yeah.
think that is really important for culture.
Are you the type of leader where like all things fall to you and it's kind of like your fault? Like do you kind of take everything of like, well, if that happened, like it's my fault for kind of like letting it happen? Or do you kind of, because that seems to be one of the things I see as like leadership is just like everything is your fault, like everything all the time, no matter what it is, it's your fault. And it's quite hard for people to take blame for mistakes if you as an engineer being like, it's my fault that you did that thing. So do you more share that blame and just go, cool, like, well, how could we like make sure that that doesn't happen
Yeah,
again?
yeah. I think it depends on the context, but I think like the majority of the times it's on the team, um, and I think that's okay. I like to avoid the blame game for any individual person when it's kind of like a process oriented thing. I think there are outliers, obviously, like if someone is genuinely not very nice or they upset someone, like of course that warrants more direct feedback to that individual in a safe environment. Yeah, I think 9 times out of 10 it's kind of likely that it's on the team and it's on whoever is working on those things in particular.
Yeah, I mean, if I think if you're sat there being like, how can we stop Jonathan hitting people in the face in the future? Like, you've got a bit of a problem, right? But
Yeah, yeah.
no, I think in general that makes sense. And like, what other one thing I'm interested in actually is you speak a lot about one-to-ones. So do you do the majority of this in your one-to-ones in terms of like, do people feel safe? Or do you use any other tools? Like, for example, I did an episode recently where someone was doing a lot through like DX and like doing a lot of
Mhm.
surveys and things like that. Do you survey any of this stuff, or like is it all through like one-to-ones and kind of like general
Yeah,
team meetings?
yeah, that's a good question. I think a lot of the time for me, it's through one to ones. I think something that I've advocated for quite strongly before has been kind of like team health checks, where we do kind of anonymous surveys. I think that also allows people to feel really safe to be quite honest and open and
Yeah.
articulate about things that have not gone well. Yeah, that was something I advocated for at Monzo, and I've kind of brought with me to every other company. I think giving people the opportunity for like just to be really honest in feedback is really good. And it's something we're doing at Zerion as well. We have kind of surveys that are sent out, and people can give their feedback. And as engineering managers, we see that feedback. Obviously, not who it's from, but yeah, it makes it really, I think, effective to action that and to act upon it. And I think this is one thing that we're seeing at the minute. We're putting a lot of focus on kind of what it means to be a high performing team that is psychologically safe, and like addressing that feedback that comes back in those surveys very visibly, I think is very important. So saying, okay, we heard what you were saying, this is how we're going to action it. I think that is so important. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
the kind of the methods for me are one-to-ones, for kind of like building that dynamic and psychological safety between manager and report. Things like retrospectives for building that safety within a team, and then surveys at like a company-wide level for building that safety wider. And then I think another example of something that I think we do particularly well at Zerion is like company all hands, where we speak very openly about what is on the founder's mind, what are we doing well, what are we struggling with. Kind of, I think that is also a really important place to kind of share that context and allow people the transparency and visibility into the company. So yeah, I think different kind of different levels and different methods, but each
Yeah.
one is equally important.
And I think like individuals will be more comfortable talking in a team environment, one on one, in a
Yeah,
like blind survey, like all of that kind of stuff. I remember a time at a company I used to work at, we got given a anonymous survey, but I had to put in my location and job title and like level of experience and stuff like that in there. And I was
yeah,
like, well, I'm the only person in this location with this job title, so like I
yeah,
probably can't answer too honestly about this. But being able to actually do that and you as a leader get completely unfiltered feedback must be great. But then
yeah,
also getting something that is, if everyone's fine and then there's one person that's not, you're kind of like, well, like, how do I fix this for the person
yeah,
that's kind of like not happy if everyone else is? So you're having that
yeah,
mixture of one-on-ones and all of that to kind of do that together, I think is great.
100%.
It seems like as an organization, you guys, this is very important to the whole organization, probably from founders down from kind of what you're saying.
Yeah,
I guess if you were, say for example, someone's working at like a much larger organization, say like a bank, and they run like a team of
hmm,
people, they're not going to be able to change the entire culture of the
for
organization.
sure.
Is this something that you can do as like a pocket within an organization, like, or is that going to be a lot harder?
I think it is going to be a lot harder, but yeah, absolutely. I think it definitely can be something that you can do. Um, I think um, obviously the best case scenario is if this is a culture or a set of values that the whole company adheres to. But yeah, absolutely. I don't think that if you're a leader that is in a much bigger company that doesn't necessarily share those values, that you should just not bother at all. I think exactly like 100% be the manager that does advocate for psychological safety, be the team lead that does advocate for team members being able to speak up and share their ideas, and be the manager that does advocate for diversity and inclusivity. 100%, yeah. Like I don't think that anyone, just like no matter what situation or company they find themselves in, should like, give up on sticking true to those values.
For sure, because I had that conversation with Danielle Summers like a few weeks ago, and she was very much just like start doing it. Like,
Yeah.
like they
Yeah.
can't
Yeah.
stop you from starting. And this was all around creating a developer culture, and it was
Yeah.
just yeah. If you start doing it, it then is part of the culture, and it
Yeah.
will kind of breed from there. I just seem to think that a lot of people, we were talking a lot, particularly around diversity and inclusion, and a lot of people sit around and wait for the sign off from like the CEO for some of these things. And like
Yes.
in a perfect world, you go have one chat with your CEO. He goes, yes, like we would love to create a psychologically safe environment. Please roll out. Let me know exactly what you need. This is priority one across the organization. But like in reality, that's not how things work, right? It could be 6 weeks until you even get time to speak to them about something
Mm.
like that,
Yeah.
and
Exactly.
and all that kind of stuff. So I think just starting to just do some of this stuff, I think is great. And there's some really easily actionable points in here, like you said, opening up about your own mistakes,
Yeah.
and making sure people feel safe and feel trusted and can kind of trust you. Is probably the easiest way to get going. I guess is there anything else for someone that wants to go away and they're like, yeah, I really want to go and start implementing this? Is there anything that either you're like, bear this in mind, like that, or things that on the topic that you've tried to do around this that were mistakes that you would have avoided if you got the chance to do it for the first time again?
Yeah. It's a really good question. I think my advice would be to anyone is just kind of be quite open about what you think is going well, what you think is not going so well with the team that you're managing, and then look to make small improvements there. So maybe it's you're not having one-to-ones with people. Maybe it's okay, you're not doing things like retrospectives. Maybe you are not advocating for kind of feedback and having a culture of feedback. Kind of looking for those smaller areas to improve, and then maybe just trying one new thing to kind of bulk. I think that is what I would encourage. I think the only kind of thing that maybe I found hard or hasn't worked so well is kind of thinking that you can change the way that things work overnight. I think it's definitely an ideal. I think making small incremental improvements with the majority of things is a good and sensible way of tackling any of these things. It's not about going in and saying, right, now we're doing this, because it's going to, yeah, it's hard. Change is hard for people. I think there's also like an element of safety to make those changes in a small and incremental and sustainable way. And I think, yeah, like there's probably been a couple of times where I've tried to change up things too fast or been unhappy with how things are and said, okay, we're doing this now. And yeah, it's difficult for people. I think if, especially if people have been at a company for a long time or the company is established and they have quite an established culture, changing those things is very hard and it's scary for people. So I think being conscious of that and kind of addressing that in a sustainable way, I think is important.
Sure. I was a couple of episodes with Sid. He was like he made one simple change for his kind of like vocabulary around this stuff, and he was like, instead of
Mm,
saying I'm going to change something, saying I'm going to experiment with something. And like again, it just makes it much less permanent. If you
yeah,
come in, you go like, right, like we're now doing like one-to-ones. Everyone's got to talk about everything that's going good and everything that's going bad, and we're doing retrospectives and we're doing all of this kind of stuff. People would be like, "What the fuck? Like what happened to you over the weekend? Like,
yeah,
why
yeah,
is everything
exactly.
changing?" And like I said, particularly if you're coming in as a new manager, or even if you just want to like change everything completely, people are gonna kind of be a bit like, what is going on, and
Yeah,
just kind of feel a little bit unstable. But I think being able to, like you said, just picking one thing, whether you're really going to work on like your one-to-ones or you're going to implement the surveys or like something
yeah,
like that, but we're just going to experiment for X amount of time. Like this is why this is what we're going to be doing. Like would love your feedback. Reason I'm doing it is because of like this.
yeah,
I feel like people would be quite open to try things like that.
yeah,
Um,
100%.
which is great. So, well, no, I really appreciate your time, James. Like all of that is awesome, and obviously I'll share your I'll share all your links and all of that. Is where would be the best place for people to reach out to you if they want to kind of chat to you further about any of this or about kind of your consulting work?
Yeah, so I have a contact form on the website. That's probably the best place. I'm probably mostly on LinkedIn or Twitter if people also want to reach out via DM there. But yeah, I think the contact form and email is definitely preferable. Yeah.
Don't worry, I won't share your WhatsApp or anything like that with people. And then just the final thing, obviously, like I said, I've followed you for a while. I've read your newsletter and things like that. But where do you kind of get your, aside from obviously listening to every single episode of this podcast ever, where do you get your kind of leadership, kind of like inspiration and advice from?
Yeah, so I primarily books. I think when I was starting out, I read all of the kind of traditional engineering management manager books. I think I think they're nice. I don't always think that they're the best kind of sources for like developing as a manager. I think so much of it is, as you say, like experimentation, trial by error, and actually just kind of doing it and learning from it. I think there's so I've got some recommended books. So I think a lot of it is on kind of the culture of leadership, the culture of innovation, and I think that there's a lot of really good resources to kind of learn from that. So yeah, I take most of my kind of inspiration from books, I would say.
Amazing. Well, yeah, you've shared a few with me there, so I'll pop them all out with the episode. Like any, you put a work in progress
Yep.
by Rene Redzepi, Work
Yes.
Clean by Dan. I should have read these before. Dan Sharpnas and Quiet by Susan Kane. Like, are they all ones that you've read fairly recently?
Yeah. So a work in progress is probably one of my favorite books. I've read it multiple times. So two of these, like completely coincidentally, are about chefing
Hmm.
and cooking. Um, I think that there's a lot of inspiration taken from that kind of. I find it quite inspiring, the kind of the artistry side of it, and then the kind of repeating that piece of art over and over again every day. I think there's something quite, I don't know, there's almost some connections with software and how we do that. We create something from scratch, but then kind of um, almost like find a more kind of repeatable way of doing it. I think
I'd
there's a lot
never,
of connections
I'd
there.
never thought about it like that before. But like, you even think about a kid. I mean, first of all my mind is doing is going to Ratatouille, which shows like where my where my mental age is. But just thinking about like the different types of engineer, the different types of people that would work in a kitchen, like all
Yes.
kind of working together for the same thing. It's a very good analogy.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think a work in progress in particular, so it follows a year in basically the world's best restaurant. Kind of the dedication, the focus, the experimentation, like the amount of detail put on to kind of like, I think the example in the book is like a carrot and getting that carrot to be like exactly right. Like it has to be so in season and so like perfect. And I find that super inspiring. Work Clean is also kind of like a homage to how like well organized chefs need to be, how they know where everything is around them. Like, they have kind of this muscle memory of picking up their knife from the same place that they put it down. Um, I think that kind of yeah. As I said, like I find that very inspiring, and I do draw connections from kind of software to from that.
Amazing. Well, thank you, mate. Really, really appreciate it. And yeah, look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Yes. Take care, Chris.
Thanks, mate. Bye.